Hello and welcome to another episode of Archery Releases Ad Nauseum. Today I'm going to test drive my new camera and mic, so now you get to see this mug in crisp, clear, unmerciful HD. And hopefully what's coming out of my mouth is worthy of the jump in audio quality. This will be part one of a two-part examination of B3 Archery's handheld releases. In this installment I'm going to cover the hinges, all of them, and part two will cover their thumbs. In my infinite wisdom, I probably should have started with the thumb releases since more people use thumbs than hinges, but I originally was just going to cover the tangent, their new for 2022 hinge. So I started writing that, and it just snowballed into examining the entire line of handhelds because I have a lot to say about them. I know you're all shocked. As usual, I'll put time codes in a pinned comment so you can pick and choose how much of my rantings you actually want to listen to. What I'm going to do, instead of spending a lot of time on just one release, I'm going to do a mini review of the features of each one individually and let you know how it sets itself apart from the line and also what to look out for and potentially avoid if you are looking to purchase one. Generally speaking, the newer offerings from the last year or so are of higher build quality and their quality control is much more stringent than in earlier years. So if you're looking to buy one used, I will try to let you know what to look for. That said, the releases do have some quirks that may influence your satisfaction, so I'm going to try to help you be informed on what to expect. Now, as a random side note, because my brain just will not let this go, for anyone who isn't familiar, B3 stands for Built the Best, Buy the Best, For the Best. I don't know if there's some other meaning to it, and then they just put that in there. But for anyone who is counting, that sentence has 5 words starting with B. So I'm going to resist the temptation to refer to them as B5 Archery for the rest of this video to avoid confusion, but I just couldn't help myself but to point it out. And frankly, it wouldn't have changed anything, and the explanation would make more sense if they had just called themselves B5 Archery in the first place. Just an observation. The hinges in the B3 line consist of the BT Mini, the Coupe, the Ghost, Infinity, BG Pro, BG Ghost, and the Tangent. The only one I don't have is the BG Ghost, but since the BG Ghost and the BG Pro are the same release made from different materials, I'm going to cover them together. So with that, let's get started. So I'm going to start off with all of the things that each of these releases have in common. So every B3 hinge has the exact same head installed on it. The head itself is aluminum, it is anodized black, and the hook is stainless steel. The head also has a rubber band wrapped around the hook and serves as a return spring. Personally, I would prefer a metal spring or a magnet since these will eventually need to be replaced when they break. They do provide a few extras with every new hinge, and they are easy to acquire by ordering orthodontic bands for braces. I think it's an 1/8 or a 3/16 inch. So it's not necessarily something I would call a deal breaker. It will be annoying when it does break on you and you're in the middle of the field. But if you like the other features of these handles in terms of shape, sizes, and features, if those are appealing to you, then I think it's still. I don't think it's a deal breaker. Another thing every B3 hinge has in common is the thumb barrel peg sits on top of a stalk that sits up and out from the body of the release and puts the peg in a spot that is easy to get your thumb around. This is good for those who draw with a lot of thumb pressure, and it makes it easy to keep the head pinned to the top of the neck while you draw, which is the way I like to do it. For those who use more even pressure across the fingers, then it's not going to matter where it is. A lot of manufacturers put the thumb peg post down here, and sometimes it's a little harder to get your thumb around it. Another thing that is common with all the releases is the height of the head, or the neck rather, is exactly the same across all of them. So every one of them, if you match up the finger beds, is exactly the same. So the other good thing about that is it is relatively short in terms of a head, if you can see for that for reference. So being able to pair this up with a thumb release is not going to be super hard. just this morning I was shooting this release and this release along with a Stan Onyx and a True Bull Executive, which is kind of the odd man out on that in that scenario. But with regards to anchor point, I was able to get a very similar anchor point across them and was able to shoot equally poorly with all of them. Something else that's worth mentioning on all B3 hinges is the hole that receives the bolt that holds the thumb peg on is machined out a little bit on both ends, as you can see here. So if you plan on running an aftermarket peg from X Oki or X Anvil or wherever you decide to get your wherever you fulfill your thumb peg needs, you may have to add washers between the handle and the peg to fill that space, or they'll have to machine a shoulder into the peg, like what they did with this one. B3 does not currently offer larger pegs for their hinges. They do for their thumbs, but not the hinges. So I don't know when that's if that's going to be a thing at some point. Also, the receiver hole is not threaded, so if you plan on running an aftermarket peg, you have to use a cap screw, button, or socket head in order to attach it. Another thing about the releases, with the exception of certain types of them with adjustable finger extensions, is the ones with solid handles or the ones that are dedicated at least to 3 fingers have a fairly generic feel in terms of ergonomics. I think of it, the way I describe it is they basically fit everyone's hands and no one's at the same time. So just about anybody can use them, even if you're going for something, even if it's someone with smaller hands that's looking for that. In the case of hinges, I don't find this to be a major issue, because I like it when there's a little bit of play in my hinge, because I like my fingers to be able to slide over as I'm rotating and executing the shot. Another thing that kind of adds or potentially detracts from their ergonomics is the index, not the index, the ring finger is just the same size or a little bit larger on the larger side. So it kind of feels like they're bigger than they really are, because there's a little bit of play there. Whereas sometimes certain releases, this area is smaller than here and here because the finger's smaller than there and there. The other releases, there is a caveat to that though. The releases with adjustable finger extensions, you can actually set them up to be made to feel smaller by taking this finger extension and then turning it in further to reduce the amount of space for your index finger. So you can really make it feel smaller than it actually is. So just something to consider. You're not going to get the fitted feel with a B3 hinge as you would like a Stanislavski that comes in different sizes, or even a Carter. So something to think about. So that covers the similarities. Now we're going to go over the differences. The differences consist of handle materials, handle shapes, sear systems, and modularity. So right now I'm going to talk about the sear systems and modularity, and then I'll get into the specifics regarding individual releases. Okay, so the B3 hinges have 2 different sear systems. The original offerings from B3 sported a traditional moon that could be flipped to employ a click or no click activation, so one machined click on the one side, so not fixed or adjustable. B3 put their own spin on it by adding an arc of detents on one side of the moon that the locking screw rests in when they're tightened down. They advertised the hinges that had this feature as micro-adjustable by using the detents for reference to adjust the speed of the moon. Unfortunately, the industry already defined micro-adjustability as something different, i.e. the movement of an adjustment via the turning of a screw. This system works just like any other moon, where you loosen the lock screw and move the piece by hand. So all the detents do is keep the lock screw from slipping if it isn't fully engaged or fully tightened down. It also introduces the possibility of being in between settings where one detent is too fast and the next is too slow. I don't personally have that issue because I'm not that picky. I tend to adapt to the way the hinge is set up and kind of meet somewhere in the middle. if they were to go in a different direction, or if they went in a different direction and relocated one of these lock screws and put a ball bearing and a spring in there so you can actually click between the detents to count them off, then maybe I would not call this potentially misleading. However, that's kind of a weird way of describing this system, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So the other system B3 developed and patented is called the Pelican Sears system. They essentially split a traditional moon into 4 pieces: slow click, slow no click, fast click, and fast no click. So what you end up doing is installing the sear that coincides with your shooting style, and then use the micro adjust system to find the actual real legit micro adjust system to fine tune within the range of that particular sear. The click on these is on the quieter side, but like most hinges, it sounds louder when it's right next to your ear. See? The click is machined onto the sear and is not independently adjustable. To change the sears in and out, you have to unscrew and remove this pivot pin that holds the head and sear in place using an 1/8 inch flathead screwdriver, the kind you'd get in an eyeglass case or eyeglass screwdriver kit. You lift up the head, you pull the pin, lift up the head, loosen the lock screw on this side using an Allen key. I think it's a 50,000th. Loosen the 2 adjustment screws and then lift the sear out of place. You then drop the sear you want into place, post first, like so. Then you replace the head. You run the pivot pin back in, and then you snug it back down with a screwdriver. At some point, I might do an instructional video on it if it's requested, but it's fairly straightforward. Once installed, the post on the bottom of the sear is sandwiched between 2 opposing set screws, threaded on both sides of the neck of the release. So right there and there. It kind of works similarly to the second axis adjustment on a bow sight, like the Spot Hawk Fast Eddy, where you screw one in and loosen the other one. So it's a good system, but they had to figure out a way to make it their own. So that's kind of what they. So on a separate note, the original design of the Pelican Sears was actually a single piece of metal, which looks to be cast or metal injection molded, with a thin tab that went in between the set screws. It actually looks pretty fragile, and I read that some people had issues with this tab breaking off if you over-tighten the set screws on it. The Sears have since been redesigned and are a 2-piece design with a cone-shaped metal post threaded into the body of the sear. It also looks machined, so a little more, it definitely has more machining to it than the originals. It definitely looks like they listened to complaints and made a potential weak spot significantly more robust. And it also looks like they tightened the tolerances between the sides of the neck and the new sear pieces, since the old ones not only had side-to-side play, and the new ones don't have any, but they also included a washer that you had to try to figure out how to mush into there to try to get it everything straightened out. The other thing of note is these, I don't have the older versions, rather. I had issues with there being some binding on the hook, meaning when I went to execute my shot, I could actually hear and feel the hook stuttering over the sear, meaning that it wasn't fully polished. So that was something they also seem to have corrected with the newer ones, because they're just buttery smooth, to be blunt. Yeah, I didn't have any issues, didn't have to do any supplemental polishing like I did with these. So on a separate note, if you ever decide to buy a B3 hinge, make specifically the ones with the Pelican system, make sure you're getting these sears and not these, because these ones you'll be good to go, and these ones are a little spotty. So to adjust the Pelican Sears system, what you do is you unlock the set screw on the side, which locks everything in place, and then you loosen one of the opposing set screws while tightening the other. I wouldn't exactly call it the most elegant of systems, and I'm not very good at keeping track of loose pieces. However, it is functional and it does get the job done. That said, I noticed when I installed the hot click sear that it can be actually set hot enough that the set screw on the middle finger side actually starts to stick out a little bit and starts to scratch against my middle finger, which is very, very distracting. I set mine up, I set this one up so the screw is flush with the side of the neck, and then I shot a few ends with it to see if it's sufficiently hot, and it actually was good enough that I left it that way. But if it turns out that I needed to set it hotter, of which it is capable, then I would have to put a shorter set screw in there so it's not sticking out and scraping my middle finger. The reason for that is because you're going to move it counterclockwise in order to, or clockwise? You got to move it clockwise in order to get to reduce the amount of travel that the hook has to go through in order to release. So I think it's the other way around. But still, if you go too far one way or another, the screws are going to stick out and then they're going to scrape against your finger. The bag that came with the Pelican Sears and the extra rubber bands did come with a couple of set screws that are of different lengths. So I'm not sure if that is to address this issue or they just happen to put in some extra randomly sized set screws, or they just used whatever they had. But if that is something that they thought of and they accounted for it, then, you know, it's worth noting and good on them. So one of the last distinguishing features of the B3 hinges is called the star drive. Now the star drive is a gear-shaped stud that is press-fit into the handle of some of their releases and allows different finger extensions to be locked into a set number of positions based on the shape of the extension. So this one, you could bring it all the way into becoming a two-finger. And then you can also have it all the way out to become like some crazily swept thing. So usually about technically there's 7 positions, but you're usually limited by the shape of the actual finger extension. So in terms of what you have as far as options go, pardon my clanking, you have a 2-finger extension that looks like this. You also have a 3-finger standard extension that looks like that. And like I said, you can bring it out so that it's straight or fully swept. You have the Pro hook, which is this one. So it's got a more pronounced hook for whatever reason to look more aggressive, I suppose. And you also have a 4-finger attachment, which is right here. So that system allows for a good amount of modularity in a release that's fairly inexpensive. So as compared to something like a True Ball Blade Pro, well, actually not the Blade Pro Flex because that's a thumb, but like an HBC Flex where you have the 3 and 4-finger attachments, but you're also paying, you know, $250 for it. You know, these releases are more in the 140 to 220 range. So you're getting a good amount of value for what you have. You do have to pay for these separately though, because this release will only come with either a Pro hook or a standard 3-finger. So you do have to buy these separately, but it's still, so maybe it does end up evening out in the end. So those are the various features of the different B3 releases. So now we're going to get into specific models. These are the Coupe and the Coupe Pro. The Coupe Pro is new for 2022. The original Coupe came in brass or stainless steel, has the original or the traditional moon, not micro-adjustable moon, and has a tapered handle. It's the only one of the B3 releases that has a tapered handle. As far as the Coupe Pro, they changed it to a Pelican Sears system. They still have the tapered handle, and other than that, no dimensional changes compared to its original. So same handle, they just changed the sear system onto it. The original Coupe came in a few different finishes. This is the chameleon finish, and the Coupe Pro just comes in bare brass or bare stainless. So moving along with solid-handled releases, now we have the B3 Ghost. Now the Ghost is basically the exact same shape as the Coupe in terms of handle shape. It's a little thicker in certain places, but it does have a straight handle at the middle and ring finger with a slightly flared index, so a little extra surface area for drawing. Like I said, same finger bed shape as the Coupe. This particular release is made only in aluminum, and it is powder coated, so it has a different texture to it, kind of like more of like a painted, like a matte painted texture. And then it's got it has the logo printed on the back. This is kind of the budget brand or budget model hinge for B3. It has the traditional moon shape or moon system for the top, and it was not updated in 2022 for the Pelican Sears. Most of the ones that have that usually are tagged with Pro, which actually I think it's the Coupe was the only one so far that's been given a Pro designation. So the last solid-handled hinge for B3 in their lineup is the BT Mini. The BT Mini comes in red anodized aluminum or brass. In the area of releases in terms of sizing, which if you need any references, please check out my website, artandarchery.com, where there is a sizing guide with 1-to-1 scale photos of every release I own. Currently up to 129 photos with multiple releases in them, so if you ever need a reference, please check that out. But with regards to sizing, the BT Mini actually does legitimately fit the profile of a small release. A lot of times when companies put out a small or a mini, something with a designation mini, a lot of times it just comes out that they are just smaller as opposed to small. So they have their original version and then they make a slightly smaller version and call it a small or a mini. This one actually does or is geared towards small hands. I can use it with my thick but very stubby fingers, but it's kind of cramped. So if you have someone with small hands, a kid or a woman that's of petite stature, this would be a good option for a hinge. I think pricing wise it only goes for about $140 for the aluminum. So in the area of value, in terms of hinges nowadays, it's pretty reasonable. It also has a straight handle too, so it's not tapered. It's more or less a miniature Ghost, if it's anything. Alright, so that's the solid handles. So let's go on to the star drives. So the initial offering in terms of the star drive was the B3 Infinity. And then its updated version, which doesn't have a finger attachment stuck to it, is the Infinity Pro. So the Infinity came in brass or stainless. Also had that chameleon finish, which apparently diminishes its value because this one I managed to get used for $100. The original version has the traditional moon system and the star drive on there. The Infinity Pro has the Pelican Sears system. It's one of the first offerings from B3 that had the Pelican Sears along with the BG Pro, which I'll be talking about next. The way to tell the two apart, other than if you just look for the moon, no moon is automatically Pelican Sears, and then if it has a moon, then it's the older version. But also there is additional machining out of this area just under the neck. So if you're looking at it, I've seen a few on eBay and such that are labeled as the Infinity Pro when it's actually this one. So it's something to keep an eye on. Like I said, between the Coupe and the Infinity, just look for the moon, and you can tell which one's which. So something to keep an eye on with regards to specifically the Infinity Pro stainless. When I bought mine, and I bought one of the first ones that came out, it had the star drive, or it has the star drive, but the star drive stud wasn't actually fully seated into the handle. You can see it's raised up a little bit. So the finger extensions would stick out on one side, and if you tighten them down as much as you're supposed to, the teeth on the star drive would dig into the aluminum finger extension and it would get stuck to it, to the point where you'd have to pound it off with a mallet. There were also sharp edges around the opposite side of the handle where the base of the star drive stud shaved off some of the material, and it was as it was being pressed in, since the hole was drilled too small. So instead of actually fixing that or putting it to the side or throwing it in a factory seconds bin, they actually just packaged it up and sent it out that way to be sold. That kind of has the hallmark of a person rushing to get a job done, having something not assembling quite right, and then they just, they just push it forward hoping nobody notices. So I did contact them about it, and their initial solution was to send me additional finger extensions that were just literally drilled out, literally reamed with no refinishing, so that they would sit flush with the handle. Now, while that works, it's kind of a half-assed solution, and would have been better to have just had me send it back straight away and get the star drive either pressed into the correct link or have it replaced. Now, to their credit, they did actually offer that if the extensions didn't work, but the point I'm trying to make and why I'm highlighting this is that it shouldn't have left the factory like that in the first place. The newer versions of the finger extensions actually have a shoulder machined into it before it was anodized, just in case the star drive isn't fully seated or something to address the issue, so that if you have one that is in this situation here, that any additional finger extensions that you purchase will actually sit flush. So they kind of addressed it in the long run, but like I said, they could have done better, or they could have earned some points if they just recalled these or just sent it back and had it replaced, which is something I would have done with my products if something was untoward. Oh, just a quick addendum. I don't remember if I mentioned this, but the B3 Infinity Pro can be had in brass or stainless, and the brass releases do not seem to have this problem because it's a softer metal. The stainless is harder to work with. So to their credit, I mean, it's a good thing that they're trying to branch out into different things and work with a tougher metal, because I love stainless steel. Whenever somebody, the first person to come out with a titanium release, I'll be all over that. But yeah, this issue does not exist with the brass version of this release. Okay, so moving along. To be candid, I'm actually doing a speed round on this because the first time I tried it, the microphone that I was using wasn't actually picking up, so I'm actually doing all of these all over again. But moving along to the next release, so the flagship release or flagship hinge for B3 Archery as of a couple of years ago is the BG Pro. BG stands for Braden Gillenthien. And this is the model of release that he used to win several competitions, and also the one that Bodie Turner, the 14-year-old, won, I think, Lancaster and Vegas with. So there's got to be something to it with that. So yeah, this particular release is primarily brass, and there is a different version of it referred to as the BG Ghost, which is basically this exact release but aluminum and powder coated, just like the other Ghost, just so it's white, just like this one. So this particular release has the Pelican Sears system. It's the first or second offering. It came out the same time as the Infinity Pro. It has the star drive system and comes with a 2-finger finger extension. And it also can be had or be made into its default setting is 3 fingers because it has a solid handle up to 3 fingers, and then it has the star drive on the end. So this could be made into a 4 finger by either rotating this out or using something like a pro hook like Braden uses occasionally. And funnily enough, it actually makes it look a lot like a Scott Ascent 4 finger. I don't know if there's any, I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but if you line these two up, they look very, very similar. Alright, so as of 2022, B3 took the design elements from the BG Pro and then refined it into this release, which is the B3 Tangent. Tangent spelled with a J, which I'm not entirely sure what the reference is for that, or what the explanation is for that, other than sometimes people just have to be different. The Tangent is essentially a BG Pro with an enclosed index finger ring and a brass extension instead of the aluminum nub that comes with the BG Pro. So the Tangent has the star drive system on it. The finger extension is brass instead of aluminum. However, the design of the handle and how the brass extension marries up to it are not conducive with adjusting its sweep or installing a different extension. So it's basically a dedicated 3 finger release with the ability to change it up, but not really being designed to be able to do that. So if you installed a different extension on it, you end up resting your pinky finger against several sharp edges where this marries up to it. So it does feel more complete than the BG Pro, which has a circle at the end and a little bit of a gap that can be felt at full draw, but I'm not certain why they bothered putting the star drive on the Tangent in the first place, with the exception of being able to move it out of the way so you can use the included Allen key to adjust the sear system. If that's the only functional reason for it, it seems kind of redundant unless they plan on offering other attachments that work seamlessly with this handle. It seems like maybe they just had used the same CAD files as the BG Pro and just didn't decide to change it. One thing in terms of fit and finish that I can say is improved on this is no sharp edges. Everything was machined well. One thing that did kind of bug me is when I took this extension off to play with it and see what kind of angles it had. There was polishing compound in here that should have been wiped off. They should have took this off and wiped it down before they packaged it. So it kind of looks like, so if I had to guess, they just had all this installed here and they just polished both of them together. The other thing that's worth noting is with the index finger ring and the way you have to adjust the sear system on here, having an enclosed finger is going to be a bit of an impediment because you need to be able to get an Allen wrench in there. So they machined out a slot in the index finger so you can access that hole. I was very interested to see how well they finished this to make sure there aren't any sharp edges here, and to their credit, the outside is very well it's not chamfered, but it is rounded off. The inside has a little bit of a sharp edge if you pull on it a little to get in there, but it's not a big deal. That's a tough area to finish off, and you're not going to come in contact that, and it's not cutting my fingers. So overall, in terms of build quality, this thing, it's probably one of my favorite hinges, and I do use it on a regular basis. So in terms of build quality, they have stepped up their game, and I have to give them a lot of credit for that. Like I said, this only comes in brass, and if they ever decide to make it in stainless, then I'd buy it in a second because I'd love to have a brass release like this. They used to, it kind of harkens back to like the Scott, not really the backspin, that's a whole different animal of itself, but the anchor and the anchor, really. And then, what's the other one? I thought there was another one with an index finger hole. Maybe the halo. The halo is brass, though. So it's got some of the design elements of those because, well, B3 used to be part of, the people in B3 used to be part of Scott and CBE as well, but that's another matter. Oh, just as a side note that I forgot to mention before, the handle of the Tangent is straight and is not tapered, and it also doesn't have a flared index finger bed like the other ones. Something else that's worth noting is the finger bed on the tangent for the index finger is nice and wide with a nice rounded edge, and this is just flat rounded. It doesn't really have a flat in the center. I don't know if that's something that was a design recommendation from the individuals who it's named after. Well, it's basically a BG Pro, so Braden Gelantine would have had the influence to tell him how he wanted it, or that's just how they did it. But yeah, it's a nice release, and I honestly don't have anything to complain about it other than they should have just got rid of the polishing compound that got stuck in the middle of in between the handle and the finger extension. So the only thing that I would also touch on in terms of where are they competing in the market. Their cheaper releases are in the, I think it's $140 to $160 range. So they're looking at they're pretty competitive in that respect. Let me fix that focus there. So they are pretty competitive in terms of pricing. Features wise, like I said, many of them, or the cheaper ones, are kind of just a basic hinge, that are competing with the likes of, what do we have anymore that's not micro adjustable? It's like Hot Shot. Hot Shot still has basic hinges. Conquest Archery has they sort of have a micro adjustable system. They unlock the thing and they have a dial on the side. The more expensive ones you're looking at, like the Tangent, are in the $220 range, unless inflation has driven them up further. But those are competing with the likes of something like a True Ball, HBC, Flex, and the Scott Longhorn Micro Pros are pretty close in that respect. A lot of the other companies are moving into micro adjustable stuff with independently adjustable clicks and Sears. So, but those are getting into, pricing wise, they're getting into the insane range of close to $300. So if you're looking for a good mid-range hinge, then these would be good competition. The one place that they do stick out is that they are one of the few that actually do offer a stainless steel handle, and the only other one right now is the Scott Ascent, so which is somewhat comparable to this, with the exception of the Ascent has the micro adjustable sear, but it has an independently gang adjustable click. So you can adjust the click on there in terms of speed. So that's kind of one of the things. I'd say the machining and the finger beds on the Ascent are a little bit nicer, and the machining is a little bit nicer than on the B3 releases. But in terms of materials, those are really the only two that are made in the U.S. There's other companies like Sanlita down in China that are, or up over in China, that are might be poaching U.S. designs in order to make their own things, but they do have a stainless steel thumb release, and so far they're the only ones that made a decent one. So that's something to think about. But in terms of competition, they make a pretty good. They're becoming a good mid-range thing, and especially something like the Tangent and the BG Pro kind of stick out. Are a pretty good competition, especially, well, they obviously are, because they're winning competitions. But granted, it's not necessarily it's more the Indian behind the string than the equipment that they're using. So I think that in terms of features, they're pretty much right down the middle. And yeah, I think the hinges are in a good place in terms of what they are and how much they cost. The thumb releases are a little bit inflated in terms of price, but I'll get to that in part 2. So I think that about covers it. I haven't really dissected any of these releases in too much detail, but they really are just a basic hinge where if you like the way they feel, they're pretty much going to give you, deliver what they promise. I can't really pick it apart too much other than little things here and there and some QC issues that seem to have been resolved as of lately. And I think they're going in the right direction. I think their thumb releases are going to still need a little bit of work, and I'll cover that in part 2. So if you like what I'm doing here, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, please check out my website at artandarchery.com or my Etsy shop, AJB Holsters. And I think that's about it. Take care, stay safe, and happy hunting. Testing to see if the mic is actually working this time, and the right one is picking up.